reacquainting myself with an old friend today, the Eventide Timefactor. This was the first piece of Eventide gear that I ever owned, and it was really important in my musical development, which is not something I can say about a lot of pieces of gear. It also got me hooked on not only the sound that Eventide gear could give me, but the features and functions that they packed into their Factor pedal series. I ended up having the pitch factor and the mod factor. I sold all three to fund an H9. You can hear the H9 all over Ragdoll's Back to Zero album. But before that, the Timefactor was the one that really blew my mind as an effects processor. I just used to like delay in the effects loop every now and then to make a guitar solo easier to play, but the flexibility and the sounds out of the Timefactor really opened me up to the whole world of delay effects. So for context, in 2013, Ragdoll did a record called All I Want Is Everything, and there were a couple of songs on there where I was using a rhythmic echo effect. We used the Soundtoys Echo Boy plugin, which turns out has a connection to Eventide, but maybe more about that later. Don't want to get too distracted. And I needed a delay pedal that could give me those sounds live. We went and did a 10-week tour of the States, so when we got to the States, I walked into a Guitar Center, probably Guitar Center, Oklahoma City, and went, I want the best delay that you have. And I ended up landing on this one for a few reasons. One, it had presets. Two, it had tap tempo. Three, it had the ability to have tap tempo and presets and use an auxiliary switch for tap tempo. So I could put the pedal somewhere and then have my auxiliary switch on another part of the stage and tap the tempo in somewhere more comfortable so I didn't have to be over my pedal board the whole time. And four, it needed to play nicely with an amp's effects loop. So on the back of this, there is a line level switch for the input and output. It goes between instrument and line level. You can also enable a kill dry function in here. So if you had an amp with a parallel effects loop, you could use this and bypass it, and it wouldn't then run dry sound in parallel with your amp and give you a whole bunch of phasey nonsense in there. It was one of the first pedals that I'm aware of like that could do all of those things. So I still remember buying this pedal, unboxing it, trying it in my rig, and the first gig that I did with it, it blew my mind. It sounded so much better than any other delay I had ever used, and I've never been the same since. So let's go through some of the sounds in here. I'm gonna start out with my favorite mod delay algorithm on here. If you take a look at the controls, getting to play around with this after so long is really satisfying. It's basically like rediscovering muscle memory that I'd forgotten all about. You've got a mix control up here. Then in every algorithm, you've got two delay lines available, delay A and delay B, and you can control the blend between them. So, all B, all A, an equal mix of either on there. When you have them both balanced and you both have them on the same time with some algorithms, you get the super wide stereo spread. You've got controls for time and feedback. Then down here, you've got a bunch of modulation and secondary functions. So modulation, depth, and speed, a filter function. Different delay algorithms use different filters on the delay lines, and then you've got the X knob on there, which has a different function per algorithm. So I'll do my best to explain what the X knob does on every algorithm. For the mod delay, I think it changes the modulation waveform, and I always liked whatever this one is over here. It looks like a sine and a cosine at the same time. Let's just have a listen to it. Make sure you're listening in stereo. Life is too short not to listen to delay pedal demos in stereo. I'll let you hear the dry sound and then I'll kick it in. This is connected straight after my guitar at the moment, so I'm going for those old school rhythmic echo effects. That mod delay just sounds lush, the way the modulation is voiced, the way the filter interacts with the delay line on there. There are other modulation shapes available, which I can take you through, but it's worth noting as well, in that case, I had the same rhythmic subdivision on there. I had it set up as a dotted eighth note delay. You can use different subdivisions on here, or you can just tap this and pump things in as millisecond time increments. I always liked it synced up to the tempo on there. That's why I bought the pedal. So if you go a dotted eighth note and a quarter note, now we have a dual delay with modulation and filtering. It's pretty beautiful. I also liked that you could combine a really short delay with a really long delay in the modulation on there, and you almost have a combination between a chorus and an echo. Another mode that I always loved on this pedal was the vintage delay, and in this case you can control the number of bits. I'd always set it to like 12 or 10 bits on here just to make the echoes sound a little bit crunchy. I'll also let you hear what happens when you set the same rhythmic subdivision on here on both delays and then blend them in equal amounts. By default, the pedal adds a modulation phase offset, so it sounds really wide in stereo. So we'll hear it on just only the A delay line, then I'll bring in A and B equally mixed with the same rhythmic subdivision, and you're going to hear it sound super wide. Again, make sure you're listening in stereo. Eventide tape echo algorithm also sounds great in this setup. I like that in this case with the X knob, you can set the amount of saturation that is happening on the echo. Also the depth and the speed are called wow and flutter on here. I like that little detail where you don't just have a generic modulation effect for every single effect type. The modulation would mirror the behavior of the physical unit. So wow and flutter are things that people talk about, and that's a language they use on tape echoes, and it's replicated here. A little details make a big difference in this case. So let's turn all of that stuff down. No saturation, no filtering, no wow, no flutter on there. This is a pretty solid sounding tape style echo on here. I'll crank the wet sound up so it's roughly at 50 on there. Again, I'm just gonna jam out with this thing. If you dial in really short delay times, you can see I've got, about 15 milliseconds and, 13, 12 milliseconds on there. You can get a really cool tape style chorus out of this. Let's chuck this in the loop now and start off with an awesome stereo chorus. I'm using the mod delay with a really short delay time, no feedback. Depth is at 10, speed is around 0.7 hertz. And then, of course, the signature dual delay, quarter note, dotted eighth note, a little bit of modulation, a little bit of filtering on there. That is amazing. For lead guitar, the duct delay is killer on here as well. I'm going to use the same delay setup on there. Actually, let's start with just delay A on, and then the X knob over here, you can set the ducking ratio. I always like a ratio of around 4 or 5 on here. Actually, if we set it at 2 to 1 to start off with, then we can set the threshold and the, what is this, the release on here. So generally with the ducker, I like a release of around 150 milliseconds. Let's set the threshold really high to start. So that way I'm probably not going to trigger it. Then we'll crank up the ratio a bit and bring that threshold down. This is still an amazing sounding pedal, and I find it particularly inspiring to work on and come back to all these years later, now that I've spent so much time with the H9 and the H9E, really playing with the algorithms, understanding how they work, but now having this really tactile and immediate physical user interface to play with. It is like rediscovering an old friend, but you've both had so much more life experience and you've got all these great stories to tell each other. So what I'm going to do is play you out with the band delay, filter pong, and reverse on here. I think the reverse is one of the best reverse delays ever in a pedal. The fact that you can have dual reverse delay in there is even cooler. There's a bunch of wacky sounds in there. You can even get a lexicon style, like diffuse style delay out of the multitap as well. And there's a looper, which I didn't cover, and the advanced features like having kill dry at the time on a pedal. I think it was one of the few pedals that could actually do that. So if you had an amp with a parallel effects loop and you want a delay, you probably had to get a Timefactor. But what an absolute trip down memory lane, rediscovering some good memories for me. Did you have one of these? Let me know in the comments section below. A big shout out to Patrick at Eventide for getting me this so I could revisit this pedal. I'll play you all out with some more glorious delay sounds from the Eventide Timefactor. I'll see you on the next one.